The demise of Technikons, a tragic tale of misguided transformation. In the annals of South Africa's educational and industrial history, Technikons once stood as towering pillars of innovation and practical skill development. These institutions were the lifeblood of the nation's industrial and economic progress, feeding great companies like Sasol, Iscor and Eskom with a steady stream of highly skilled professionals. They were the engines that powered the country's development, ensuring that the workforce was not only theoretically sound, but also practically adept. However, the decision by the African National Congress, ANC, led government to remodel these Technikons into universities stands as one of the most misguided and destructive acts in the history of South African education. Technikons were unique in their approach to education. They focused on applied sciences, engineering and technology, offering diploma and certificate courses that were directly aligned with the needs of industry. This practical orientation made them indispensable to the country's development. Graduates from Technikons were ready to hit the ground running, equipped with the hands-on skills required to keep the wheels of industry turning. They were the backbone of South Africa's industrial sector, ensuring that companies had access to the skilled labour they needed to thrive. However, in a move that can only be described as the height of bureaucratic arrogance and egotistical nonsense, the ANC government decided to force these Technikons to transform into universities. This decision was not driven by a genuine desire to improve the quality of education, but rather by a misguided belief that universities were inherently superior to Technikons. The result has been nothing short of catastrophic. Take, for example, the case of Technikon Witwatersrand, a once proud institution that was completely swallowed up and merged into the Rand Afrikaans University, now known as the University of Johannesburg. This merger was not a marriage of equals, but rather a hostile takeover that erased the unique identity and purpose of the Technikon. The practical, skills-based education that was the hallmark of Technikon Witwatersrand was sacrificed on the Hague altar of academic elitism, leaving a void that has yet to be filled. The consequences of this transformation have been far-reaching. The new universities that emerged from the ashes of the Technikons have struggled to maintain the same level of industry relevance. The focus has shifted from practical skills to theoretical knowledge, leaving graduates ill-prepared for the demands of the workplace. Companies that once relied on Technikon graduates for their technical expertise now find themselves having to invest heavily in additional training to bring new hires up to speed. Moreover, the loss of the Technikons has had a devastating impact on South Africa's ability to innovate and compete on the global stage. The practical, hands-on approach of the Technikons was a key driver of innovation, fostering a culture of problem-solving and creativity that is sorely lacking in the current university system. By dismantling these institutions, the ANC government has effectively stifled the country's capacity for technological advancement. It is difficult to overstate the sheer madness and destructiveness of the ANC's decision to remodel the Technikons. This was not a well-considered policy aimed at improving education, but rather a knee-jerk reaction driven by a desire to impose a one-size-fits-all model on a diverse and complex educational landscape. The result has been a disaster of epic proportions, one that has set back South Africa's development by decades. In conclusion, the demise of the Technikons is a tragic tale of misguided transformation, and bureaucratic arrogance. These institutions were the engines of innovation and the lifeblood of South Africa's industrial sector. Their destruction at the hands of the ANC government stands as a stark reminder of the dangers of prioritizing ideology over practicality. If South Africa is to regain its position as a leader in innovation and industrial development, it must learn from the mistakes of the past and work to rebuild the practical, skills-based education system that once made it great. The Technikons may be gone, but their legacy must not be forgotten. In this book, you are going to get the full story. The book is researched and written by great minds and edited by Kanyane. The book is narrated by the versatile Velvet, voice of Jane Blake, so beautiful girl with a beautiful voice, once an intern journalist at BBC News. So, here is Jane Blake narrating.
From Technikons to ruins, how the ANC crushed South Africa's skills engine. For a country that once stood on the brink of industrial and technical greatness, South Africa's collapse in skilled labor, infrastructure, and economic potential is no accident. It is the direct result of political sabotage. The ANC's destruction of the Technikon system, coupled with the decay of essential infrastructure like rail, marks one of the most tragic betrayals in post-apartheid governance. Technikons were once the engines of South Africa's industrial betuwer success, producing hands-on professionals in engineering, logistics, manufacturing, and applied sciences. They were designed to bridge the gap between theory and real-world application, feeding skilled workers directly into the economy. These institutions gave disadvantaged students a fighting chance, nurtured raw talent into employable professionals, and created a clear pipeline for industry leaders like Sasol, Eskom, Iscor, and Transnet. But instead of expanding and improving this system, the ANC government, blinded by ideology, erased it entirely. Through a series of forced mergers, reckless university reclassifications, and political interference, once thriving institutions like Technikon Northern Transvaal, Technikon Northwest, Peninsula Technikon, and Cape Technikon were either swallowed up or forced into chaotic, unstable Frankenstein universities like Tshwane University of Technology, TUT, and Cape Peninsula University of Technology, CPUT. What should have been a future of innovation, job creation, and industrial excellence instead became a wasteland of broken infrastructure, unemployable graduates, and perpetual instability, a nation that killed its own progress. This feature lays bare the damage inflicted on South Africa's skills pipeline and economic future. It details how township Technikons were deliberately destroyed, erasing institutions that had perfected the art of uplifting disadvantaged students into thriving professionals. The betrayal of Pretoria Technikon, which was once a structured, high-performance institution producing world-class technical graduates. The tragedy of Cape Technikon, which was poised to become South Africa's own MIT, only to be flattened in a politically engineered merger that wiped out its excellence. The collapse of South Africa's railway system, a direct result of skills depletion, mismanagement, and the loss of technically trained professionals. The devastating impact of these decisions on the economy, with industry giants now importing skilled labor from abroad while millions of South Africans remain unemployed. In its pursuit of ideological equality, the ANC flattened every institution to the lowest common denominator instead of raising struggling institutions to the level of their high-performing counterparts. What was left behind was a broken education system, a crumbling industrial sector, and a nation falling deeper into economic stagnation. This is the story of how the ANC killed South Africa's technical brilliance, turned railways into graveyards, and destroyed the very institutions that could have lifted millions out of poverty. It is a story of arrogance, incompetence, and betrayal. And the worst part? They still refuse to acknowledge the damage they've done. The foolish argument of, "it was just a name change," to those who blindly defend the ANC's destructive education policies by claiming that it was merely a name change, that Technikons continued as universities of technology, such thinking is either staggeringly naive or outright dishonest. This is not just about rebranding. It is about the deliberate erasure of entire institutional legacies, the dismantling of specialized education systems, and the bureaucratic destruction of what worked. If it were just a name change, why did the ANC spend millions eradicating the identities, reputations, and functional structures of these institutions? Consider the scale of the damage. A name change doesn't require merging distinct institutions. Pretoria Technikon, an institution that was producing world-class engineers and technicians, was forcibly merged with township technikons that had entirely different missions and educational models. The result? None of these institutions retained their strengths. Instead, we got a bloated, incoherent mess called Tshwane University of Technology, which even today lacks central direction. A name change doesn't require wiping out. Generations of institutional culture, Cape Technikon was on track to become Africa's MIT. It was a rising center of technical and engineering excellence. Peninsula Technikon was a pillar of education for the colored working class, an institution deeply embedded in its community. Instead of investing in their growth, the ANC flattened them into CPUT, an institution with no clear identity and no ability to match what Cape Technikon was becoming. If it was just a name change, why erase decades of carefully built institutional excellence? A name change doesn't require wasting millions on a meaningless overhaul. The ANC spent millions of rands destroying the branding, structure, and academic independence of these institutions. They hired committees of bureaucrats to wipe out decades of reputation building, restructure departments, and replace specialized curricula with one-size-fits-all mediocrity. This was not a neutral process. It was deliberate destruction. A name change doesn't require creating a Frankenstein education system that still doesn't work. If these were merely universities of technology, why do they fail to produce the same quality of graduates that Technikons once did? Why are industries now struggling to find employable technical professionals when before the mergers, companies like Eskom, Transnet, and Sasol had a direct pipeline of job-ready graduates? Why has the very purpose of these institutions, hands-on, practical training, been diluted beyond recognition? A name change doesn't require ruining the job. Prospects of graduates before the mergers, Technikon graduates had clear career pathways because they were respected by industry leaders. After the ANC meddling, companies began to doubt the quality of these new universities of technology. Today, graduates from TIUT, CPUT, and other merged institutions struggle to gain the same credibility that their Technikon predecessors had. The truth. It was a political purge, not a simple name. Change this was never about rebranding. It was about flattening institutions that had histories, reputations, and strengths. It was about destroying Pretoria Technikon because it had too many successful Afrikaners. It was about removing Cape Technikon from its fast track to global excellence. It was about erasing Peninsula Technikon because the ANC refuses to recognize the educational struggles of the colored community. It was about reducing everything to the lowest common denominator in the name of false equality. The result? South Africa didn't gain stronger institutions. It gained bloated, unstable, and ineffective Frankenstein universities that continue to produce weaker graduates, struggling to find jobs in an economy that desperately needs skills. This wasn't a name change. This was academic arson. The tragic dismantling of South Africa's Technikons, a case study in political mismanagement. South Africa's Technikons were once the backbone of the country's industrial and technical progress, churning out skilled graduates who directly fueled the nation's powerhouse companies such as Sasol, Iscor, now ArcelorMittal South Africa, Eskom, Denel, and Transnet. These institutions specialized in applied sciences, engineering, and practical skills, bridging the critical gap between theoretical knowledge and real-world industry needs. Then came the post-1994 government, led by the African National Congress, ANC. With an agenda that went beyond transformation, it became a wrecking ball for efficiency, meritocracy, and economic pragmatism. How Technikons built the economy before their ill-advised reclassification into universities of technology. In the early 2000s, Technikons played a unique role in the higher education landscape. Unlike traditional universities, which focused primarily on academic and theoretical knowledge, Technikons provided hands-on, job-ready skills tailored for the industrial and commercial sectors. These institutions had a reputation for producing graduates who were immediately employable and could integrate seamlessly into high-demand industries. Working closely with South Africa's biggest state-owned enterprises, SOEs, to create a talent pipeline that kept the country's energy, mining, and manufacturing sectors competitive, emphasizing vocational and technical skills, ensuring that graduates didn't just leave with degrees, but with actual applicable competencies, streamlining higher education into an efficient dual system, where universities focused on pure academics and research, while technikons trained people to fill critical industrial gaps. This model worked brilliantly. Technikon Witwatersrand, TWR, for example, was a powerhouse in engineering, construction, and applied sciences. It had a direct pipeline to industries like Sasol and Eskom, producing graduates who could walk out of class and straight into the economy's engine room. The same was true for institutions like Pretoria Technikon, Port Elizabeth Technikon, and Cape Technikon. Enter the ANC, the madness of university status. Then, politics took over. The ANC government, drunk on ideology rather than economic pragmatism, decided that the entire education system needed transformation. This led to the reckless dismantling and forced mergers of technikons into universities. The so-called higher education restructuring of 2004-2005 saw the forced rebranding of technikons into universities of technology, effectively erasing their distinct identity. The absorption and destruction of legendary institutions like Technikon Witwatersrand, which was swallowed by Rand Afrikaans University, RAU, to form the University of Johannesburg. The disappearance of industry-driven curricula, as many knew. Universities of technology drifted towards unnecessary degree programs rather than maintaining a strong vocational focus. A loss of efficiency and skills development, as many technikons had to restructure their programs to fit university models that were never designed for applied learning. This was sheer madness. Instead of recognizing that a dual education system, one for academic knowledge and one for applied technical skills, was crucial, the ANC bulldozed its way through with its obsession to equalize everything, even at the cost of excellence. The fallout. A country deprived of technical expertise. The impact of this foolish policy has been catastrophic. SOEs have collapsed under skills. Shortages. Eskom, once a world-class power utility, has suffered from a severe lack of skilled engineers and technical staff. Transnet and PRASA are plagued by operational inefficiencies because the pipeline of well-trained, job-ready technikon graduates has dried up. Sasol, once a shining beacon of South African engineering excellence, has been forced to look abroad for talent in chemical engineering and industrial operations. Graduates are unemployable. Universities of technology have watered down their programs, and many graduates now hold degrees with limited practical industry applications. Unlike before, where a technikon graduate could walk straight into a job, today's UOT graduates struggle to meet industry expectations. The artisan crisis. The country can't build anything before the merger. Technikons produced highly skilled artisans, builders, and engineers who could work on large-scale infrastructure projects. Today, South Africa faces a critical shortage of qualified artisans and technicians. Companies are now importing artisans from Zimbabwe and China to do work that once proudly belonged to South Africans. The erasure of a proven model countries like Germany, Switzerland, and Austria continue to thrive using a dual education system, universities for academic knowledge and technical institutions for applied skills. South Africa had the same model, but threw it away in favor of a failed one-size-fits-all university approach. A political decision, not an educational one. Let's be clear, this was not about improving education. It was about political interference and ideological dogma. The ANC wanted to reshape higher education in its own image, regardless of economic logic or the needs of the job market. Rather than building on what worked, they erased history, merged institutions for the sake of it, and imposed an impractical, new model. The irony? Even today, after 2 decades of this disaster, no ANC leader will admit that it was a mistake. They will blame apartheid, blame the private sector, blame everyone but themselves for the destruction they caused. The way forward? Can we fix this? The reality is that South Africa desperately needs to reinstate a strong technical education model. If we are serious about reviving the economy and restoring industrial efficiency, we must re-establish standalone technical colleges and applied universities, separate from traditional academic universities. Work directly with SOEs and private industry to create job-ready graduates again. Focus on vocational excellence, not just degrees, because a piece of paper without practical ability is meaningless. Remove political interference from education, policy, and let industry experts, not career politicians, guide the future of higher education. South Africa was once an industrial and energy powerhouse, and much of that was thanks to the Technikon system. If the country ever hopes to restore its former glory, it must undo this ANC-imposed disaster and return to what works. Because as it stands now, South Africa is paying the price for ideological arrogance, and the bill keeps getting bigger. The collapse of South Africa's railway system, a silent tragedy that signals the end of a rising giant. Once upon a time, South Africa's railway system was the lifeblood of its industrial economy, a sprawling network of efficiency, order, and connectivity. Trains carried not only passengers across provinces, but also tons of coal, minerals, steel, and manufactured goods to ports, factories, and power stations. The sight of massive goods trains snaking through the Karoo and passenger coaches pulling into city stations like Cape Town, Durban, and Park Station in Johannesburg was symbolic of a country on the move, an African nation ready to join the ranks of the Asian tigers. But that promise is gone now. Today, rusting train tracks, vandalized stations, and abandoned locomotives stand as monuments to gross mismanagement, systemic theft, and the destruction of a once glorious engineering marvel. South Africa's railway collapse is not just a story of state failure. It is a story of educational vandalism and the deliberate extermination of technical skills, rooted in the destruction of the very institutions that built the system. The Technikons. The golden era of South African railways. From the early 1900s to the late 1990s, South Africa's rail network was one of the best on the continent. Passenger trains connected rural communities to economic hubs and gave the working class dignity through safe, affordable travel. Heavy freight lines transported coal from Mpumalanga to Richards Bay, iron ore from Sishen to Saldanha, and manganese from the Northern Cape to Port Elizabeth. Industrial giants like Iscor and Eskom relied on rail to move material with military precision. Maintenance and control of this system was no fluke. It was built on generations of well-trained engineers, artisans, signal operators, and transport. Logisticians, largely drawn from the country's technikons. These technikons produced fleet maintenance technicians, rail engineers, signal electricians, depot managers, mechanical artisans, and a wide range of technical personnel who understood the complexities of operating and preserving such a vast infrastructure. This system was more than functional. It was a model for other African nations and positioned South Africa as a rising industrial leader. The Technikon collapse. Skills died, and so did the rails. Then came the ANC communistic transformation agenda, which saw the destruction of the Technikon system in favor of universities of technology that traded practical learning for abstract theory. Suddenly, no new generation of technical railway workers was trained. Rail engineering programs were diluted or discontinued. The pipeline of skilled workers who kept locomotives running, maintained rail lines, and operated control centers was cut off. South Africa did not just lose a rail network, it lost the human capital and institutional infrastructure that made rail work. A nation that abandoned its engine room today, the results are visible and catastrophic. Passenger trains have been reduced to ghost services, running late, if at all, with broken windows and gutted coaches. PRASA, Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, is on life support, crippled by corruption, incompetence, and theft. Goods trains have been replaced by trucks, leading to congested, potholed roads and a broken logistics chain. Theft of cables, rail lines, and locomotives goes unchecked because there are no longer trained technical staff in the communities who take ownership and pride in maintaining the infrastructure. All these because of ANC communism agenda. Entire train depots lie in ruins, vandalized beyond repair. The collapse of rail is not just a transport issue. It is an economic catastrophe. Mining companies can no longer export minerals efficiently. Manufacturing firms have to pay more for road transport. Ports suffer from backlogs. Rural areas are economically disconnected. The dream of regional integration via rail is dead. The lost opportunity. We could have been an African tiger. At the dawn of democracy, South Africa had the infrastructure, industrial capacity, and skills base to become Africa's first Asian tiger. Like Singapore, Taiwan, or South Korea, we had a disciplined workforce, a strong industrial base, good transport infrastructure, world-class engineering and mining expertise, and a functioning Technikon system producing technical specialists ready to serve. The economy? Instead of building on this, the government tore it down. Rather than professionalizing and modernizing the railway system, they filled it with political appointments, underqualified managers, and cronies. They looted it until there was nothing left but rail lines used for washing lines and homeless shelters. The political betrayal and the price. Let us be honest, this is not a natural disaster. It is political vandalism. The destruction of Witwatersrand, Technikons, and railways was a result of ideological arrogance, political appointments over merit, and the obsession with transformation over excellence. South Africa didn't fall behind because of a lack of potential. It was sabotaged by those in power, and now the price is clear. We are not an Asian tiger. We are not the gateway to Africa. We are not the industrial powerhouse we were destined to be. Instead, we are a struggling economy with broken trains, broken roads, and broken promises. What must be done? If there is any hope of saving what is left, South Africa must rebuild technical education, reinstate Technikons or specialized technical colleges focused solely on producing transport, engineering, and logistics specialists, depoliticize SOEs and PRASA, place rail infrastructure under the control of competent professionals, not party loyalists, secure and restore key freight and passenger routes with public-private partnerships and community ownership models, launch a skills revival program, train thousands of artisans, welders, engineers, and electricians specifically for rail infrastructure, introduce national service for infrastructure, get unemployed youth into short-term training and work programs, to protect and rebuild railways. The track to the future is still there. South Africa's railway lines are not just rusted steel. They are symbols of what we once were and what we could become again. If we do not rebuild the technical capacity, educational backbone, and ethical leadership required to run them, we will continue to slide further away from our potential. But if we are bold enough to reverse the damage, resurrect our Technikons, and empower our youth with practical skills, the tracks may yet carry us back to greatness. This is not just about trains, it is about our future. The ANC's destruction of township. Technikons, a communist experiment that crushed opportunity and killed aspiration. Few things capture the mindless arrogance and destructive incompetence of the ANC, like its handling of South Africa's Technikons. In townships, institutions that were once lifelines for disadvantaged communities, training youth on the brink of being lost to poverty and crime, and turning them into skilled, employable professionals. Among the most egregious examples of ANC mismanagement was the forced merger of Technikon Northern Transvaal and Technikon Northwest with Pretoria Technikon, a move driven not by logic, not by economic pragmatism, but by sheer ideological stupidity. This was not an academic decision. It was not about improving education. It was about leveling everything down to the lowest common denominator under the false communist illusion of equality. The result? The erasure of township-based institutions that had developed deep expertise in identifying and uplifting struggling students, the dilution of Pretoria Technikon's Afrikaner-led technical excellence, and the wholesale destruction of an ecosystem. That was working. Township Technikons, the unsung heroes of skills development. Before the ANC's meddling, TNG and Technikon Northwest were performing critical national work, something that no university in South Africa could claim to do at scale. They were sharp on the ground, identifying rough diamonds in disadvantaged communities. These institutions had experience working with youth who had grown up in poverty, attended underfunded schools, and faced enormous odds. Yet, they knew how to take these students, guide them, and mold them into thriving professionals with technical skills in engineering, construction, information technology, and logistics. They saved thousands of young people from the cycle of poverty. Without these technikons, many young South Africans would have been lost to unemployment, gangs, and crime. Instead, these institutions had the ability to nurture disadvantaged students, giving them skills that would lead to immediate employment. They were effective because they had deep, first-hand experience. These technikons had years of experience in bridging the gap between struggling high school graduates and industry-ready professionals. They understood how to mentor, train, and develop students from poor backgrounds in a way that elite universities or large institutions could not. And then, the ANC came in and destroyed all of this. The Pretoria Technikon story, an Afrikaner and middle-class pipeline that was also erased while township technikons worked on uplifting students from extreme poverty. Pretoria Technikon was a powerhouse of technical excellence, producing skilled Afrikaner engineers, technicians, and professionals who kept South Africa's industrial economy running. It was a direct pipeline for the Afrikaner middle class and working class black students from relatively stable homes into engineering, business, and IT careers. It had strong industry ties, feeding graduates into Sasol, Eskom, Iscor, and other major employers. Pretoria Technikon was efficient, well-run, and world-class in its technical offerings. But instead of recognizing Pretoria Technikon's success and using it as a model for others to aspire to, the ANC saw it through the lens of race and ideology. To them, Pretoria Technikon was too white, too structured, too effective. It had to be equalized with the township technikons. But instead of raising the township technikons to Pretoria Technikon's standard, the ANC did what communists always do. They destroyed the higher performer instead of improving the lower ones. The forced merger of Pretoria Technikon with the township technikons did not elevate township students. It obliterated Pretoria Technikon's technical excellence while simultaneously dismantling the township technikon's ability to provide tailored support to disadvantaged students. What did the mergers achieve? A complete disaster. Let's examine the results of this ANC-engineered academic genocide. The death of ground-level skills development in townships. Township-based technikons knew how to uplift struggling students and get them into technical careers. That expertise is now lost. These merged institutions have become bloated, inefficient bureaucracies that no longer serve the needs of poor communities. Pretoria Technikon's excellence was erased. Pretoria Technikon was an Afrikaner-led institution that had perfected technical education. Instead of using its model to create more success stories, the ANC dragged it down, stuffing it into an ill-fitting merger. The result? Mediocrity where there was once excellence. We have graduates who think going to university is to work for government, but I cannot blame them. The dependency mentality and the manner in which the ANC has infiltrated the minds of people is so astounding that people think they cannot function without government. The communist experiment that destroyed education, this ANC racial and communist engineering experiment, was doomed from the start. Instead of understanding the different strengths of these institutions, they applied a one-size-fits-all communist model of forced equality. They ignored the fact that township technikons were unique in recruiting and mentoring struggling students. They ignored that Pretoria Technikon had a structured system that worked. They ignored that you cannot destroy high performance in the name of equality and expect progress. And now, what do we have left? A dead system that no longer uplifts township youth. A collapsed Pretoria Technikon that no longer produces world-class technical professionals. A nation with a crumbling technical skills base. Industries struggling to find qualified workers, and an education system that has gone backward. The ANC, in its blind pursuit of ideology over logic, has achieved nothing but ruins. The Mbambo forward. Can this be reversed? If South Africa wants to survive, the damage must be undone. Re-establish independent technikons in townships, focusing on training and mentoring disadvantaged youth. Rebuild Pretoria Technikon as a world-class technical institution, restoring its specialized programs. End political interference in education. Focus on industry-driven training, not ideological nonsense. Treat technical education as a national priority, rather than a political pawn. The tragedy of wasted potential. South Africa could have been a technical powerhouse. Instead, thanks to ANC incompetence, communist thinking, and racial engineering, It is a country with a dying economy, a broken education system, and a generation of youth robbed of their future. This was not just a bad policy, it was an educational crime. And until this destructive ideology is purged from our institutions, South Africa will remain a country of lost potential, abandoned railway lines, collapsing industries, and broken dreams. Tshwane University of Technology, a Frankenstein institution of perpetual instability. The forced merger that created Tshwane University of Technology, TUT, is one of the greatest blunders in South African higher education history. What was once a group of distinct, specialized, and highly effective technikons, each with its own solid foundation and distinctive strengths, was thrown into a political blender, mixed into a monstrous, incoherent institution that has never found its identity. TUT is not an institution. It is an ongoing crisis. It lacks central coherence, a strong institutional culture, and a clear technical direction. It is a mess of contradictions, administrative chaos, and clashing educational philosophies that have made it an unsteady, bloated, and directionless university. This was never about educational improvement. It was a political experiment, one that has failed spectacularly. The distinctive strengths that were destroyed. Before the ANC's ideological meddling, the institutions that were merged to create TUT each had a distinct identity, specialization, institutional culture that made them uniquely successful. Technikon Northern Transvaal, popularly known as TNG, the ground-level transformer. This institution was not just a technikon, it was a life-saving intervention for youth in disadvantaged communities. It had an exceptional ability to find and develop rough diamonds, students who, without proper mentorship, would have been lost to unemployment, gangs, or the streets. It was deeply rooted in township realities and knew how to bridge the gap between struggling school leavers and industrial careers. The institution's leadership understood the unique challenges of students from poor backgrounds and tailored their programs to ensure their success. Technikon Northwest, a powerhouse of practical learning. It specialized in technical and applied skills, offering real-world, hands-on training that gave its graduates immediate employability. The staff and lecturers were industry-connected professionals, ensuring that the curriculum was always aligned with job market needs. The institution had a small but efficient system, ensuring that students received focused attention and quality. Mentorship through Pretoria. Technikon, the Afrikaner and Black middle-class technical hub. This was not just another technikon, it was a structured, high-performance technical institution that served both Afrikaners and upwardly mobile Black students. Pretoria Technikon had an established reputation for excellence, producing highly skilled professionals in engineering, business, and information technology. It was an incubator for industrial talent, feeding top-tier graduates into Major South. African companies like Sasol, Eskom, Iscor, and Transnet. The institution had a strong leadership structure, a well-defined academic strategy, and a highly disciplined environment. These were three distinct institutions, each serving a clear and necessary role in South Africa's higher education landscape. The creation of Tshwane University of Technology, a disaster of perpetual instability. The merger smashing square pegs into round holes. In 2004, these three very different technikons were clumped together to create TUT. This was done without consideration for their unique strengths, their institutional cultures, or the students they served. There was no natural alignment between them. Instead, they were forced into a Frankenstein structure that never made sense. The result, a monstrous, bloated, and incoherent institution. The forced merger created an institution that lacked central coherence. It was not built on a shared vision or identity, but on a forced administrative combination, suffered from endless instability. The institution has been plagued by leadership crises, financial mismanagement, and endless student protests. Lost the ability to effectively serve its students. The institutions that once provided focused, specialized technical training were replaced by a vague, unfocused, and inefficient system. TUT never developed a single, unified institutional culture. Instead, it remains a disjointed mess, constantly in turmoil. Why the merger was doomed from the start. Three different institutions were forced into one, without a shared purpose. TNG was community-focused, dedicated to uplifting struggling students. Technikon Northwest was industry-aligned, preparing job-ready graduates for practical careers. Pretoria Technikon was highly structured and disciplined, with strong industry ties. Throwing them together was like forcing an elite military academy, a community college, and a vocational training center into a single institution and expecting it to work. The merger created a directionless behemoth. Instead of 3 efficient, specialized technikons, we now have one oversized, bureaucratic, inefficient university. TUT is neither a strong academic university nor a strong technical institution. It is a weak, confused version of both. Students now graduate without the same level of specialized training, making them less employable than before. The merger was driven by communist and racial engineering, not academic logic. The real reason behind the merger was not about improving education, but about racial engineering and communist-style leveling. The ANC wanted to dilute Pretoria Technikon's Afrikaner legacy instead of preserving its technical excellence. Instead of helping township technikons rise to Pretoria Technikon's level, they dragged Pretoria Technikon down into incoherence. The damage to students and South Africa's economy, the creation of TUT has harmed students, industries, and South Africa's long-term economic development. Students are trapped in an unstable, mismanaged system that constantly changes policies, suffers from poor administration, and is riddled with strikes. Industries that once relied on well-trained technikon, graduates now struggle to find skilled workers. The pipeline of job-ready engineers, technicians, and artisans has dried up, leaving South Africa with a growing skills crisis. What was once a set of thriving institutions producing employable professionals has become a factory of instability, mediocrity, and lost potential. The only solution: reverse this disaster. If South Africa wants to reclaim its place as an industrial and technical powerhouse, TUT must be disbanded and its original institutions reinstated and restructured as standalone technikons. Steps to fix this catastrophe: re-establish Pretoria Technikon as a high-performance technical institute for industrial and commercial careers. Restore TNG as a focused institution dedicated to training youth from disadvantaged backgrounds. Rebuild Technikon Northwest as an industry-aligned vocational hub. End political interference in technical education. Separate technical training from university academics because forcing them together has failed. Conclusion: a country that destroys its best institutions destroys its future. The creation of TUT was not just an administrative mistake, it was a national tragedy. It destroyed specialized, effective technikons. It created a bloated, incoherent institution riddled with instability. It robbed South Africa of the technical skills pipeline that once made it a rising industrial nation. Tshwane University of Technology is a failed communist experiment in forced equality. Until South Africa undoes this disaster and restores the excellence of its former technikons, it will continue to sink further into mediocrity, producing graduates who are less skilled, less employable, and less prepared for the future. How the ANC burned down the Cape's brightest educational hope: the tragic merger of Peninsula Technikon and Cape Technikon, South Africa's democratic dawn, came with promises of redress, dignity, and opportunity for all, especially for those who had been historically marginalized. But as history has painfully shown, the African National Congress, ANC, often confuses equality with equal destruction. Nowhere is this more heartbreakingly evident than in the forced merger of Peninsula Technikon and Cape Technikon, an act that burned the rising brilliance of Cape Technikon, an institution that was on track to become Africa's own version of MIT or the California Institute of Technology. Instead of elevating Peninsula Technikon, a valuable institution with a unique place among colored communities who had long suffered exclusion, the ANC chose to flatten both. The result? Another monstrous hybrid called the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, CPUT, a place with neither the spirit of Cape Technikon nor the cultural foothold of Peninsula Technikon. Cape Technikon, South Africa's answer to the world's leading tech institutes. Before the merger, Cape Technikon was a beacon of excellence. It had world-class engineering programs, particularly in electronics, mechatronics, maritime studies, and civil engineering. Strong research collaborations with European, American, and Asian universities. a pipeline of high-performing Black and white students, many of whom were snatched up by the private sector before graduation. A fast-growing ambition to become Africa's own MIT, a technical institution grounded in research, innovation, and solving real-world problems. This was not some second-rate polytechnic. Cape Technikon was rising fast, becoming an intellectual force to be reckoned with. Peninsula Technikon, the cultural and educational stronghold of the colored community. Meanwhile, Peninsula Technikon played a critical, humane role. It was the soul and pride of the colored community in Cape Town and surrounding areas. For generations of families excluded by apartheid and later neglected by post-1994 policy, Peninsula Technikon was the one institution that felt like home. It nurtured first-generation students, offering them practical qualifications and a sense of dignity. But instead of building both institutions to their highest potential, the ANC, in its drive for political symbolism, smashed them together. Without a blueprint, without logic, and without respect for either institution's soul. Enter CPUT, the politically engineered Frankenstein in the early 2000s. Both institutions were forcibly merged to form the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, CPUT. And just like that, Cape Technikon's excellence was gutted. Peninsula Technikon's unique social mission was diluted. The future of colored. Technical education was abandoned. No clear academic identity emerged. CPUT became just another bureaucratic holding facility for confused governance, endless student protests, and chaotic management. There was no shared mission, no central strategy, no identity that students and staff could rally behind. What should have been two distinct powerhouses, one a technical innovator, the other a community upliftment vehicle, became a collapsing silo of mediocrity. The broader injustice. What the ANC refused to see. Let's not mince words. Cape Technikon was headed toward global excellence. Peninsula Technikon was fulfilling a deep generational promise to the colored working class. What both institutions needed was investment, respect, and a chance to evolve on their own terms. What they got was a reckless merger born of communistic ideas of forced sameness, the burning of academic excellence in the name of transformation, a brutal refusal to let colored communities keep a place of their own. Again, we all know that for whatever tragic reasons, be it exclusion, neglect, or economic barriers, colored youth continue to be left behind in the national educational system. Peninsula Technikon was a safe harbor that understood this, but the ANC saw it as just another racial relic to be absorbed and erased. What could have been two institutions, two missions, one success story. South Africa could have had Cape Technikon growing into a world-class tech and research university, forging African innovations and leading on the global stage. Peninsula Technikon standing proudly as a community-rooted institution, pumping out job-ready graduates, artisans, and technicians with a special eye for colored youth often ignored elsewhere. These were complementary missions, not contradictory ones. Instead, the ANC broke both wings of the same bird and expected it to fly. What we're left with? A hollow shell today. CPUT is plagued by instability, governance failures, and student unrest. Unfocused in its technical training, unable to recapture the spirit, excellence, or social intelligence of the institutions it replaced. There is no MIT of Africa in Cape Town. There is no stronghold for the colored community. There is only a ghost of what could have been. The future was stolen in the name of equality. This was not equality. This was educational arson. The ANC's decision to merge Cape Technikon and Peninsula Technikon destroyed two necessary, functioning, and beloved institutions. It flattened excellence and community pride under the dull blade of ideology. It turned promise into ruins and widened the very educational gaps it claimed to be fixing. If South Africa is serious about repairing its technical education and restoring dignity to forgotten communities, we must stop pretending that destructive mergers are transformation. Real transformation is about building, not flattening, elevating, not erasing. Until that lesson is learned, the country will keep burning its own future, one merger at a time. South Africa, once a beacon of technical prowess on the African continent, now looking to neighboring Zimbabwe to fill its technical skills gap. This shift underscores the profound challenges facing South Africa's education and training systems. The erosion of technical education. Historically, South Africa's technikons were instrumental in producing a workforce adept in various technical fields. However, the transformation of these institutions into universities of technology has not yielded the desired outcomes. Instead, it has led to a dilution of practical training, resulting in graduates who are less prepared for the demands of the industry. The current skills shortage. The consequence of these educational reforms is a pronounced shortage of critical skills within the country. Industries are struggling to find qualified professionals locally, leading to an increased reliance on foreign expertise. Notably, South Africa has issued approximately 4,913 critical skills visas since 2020, with a significant portion granted to nationals from Zimbabwe and India. Zimbabwe's role in bridging the gap. Zimbabwean professionals, particularly in fields like auditing, software development, nursing, and ICT systems analysis, have become vital in addressing South Africa's skills deficit. This reliance highlights the unintended consequences of domestic policy decisions on education and training. A call for reflection and reform. This situation serves as a poignant reminder of the need to reassess and revitalize South Africa's approach to technical education. By acknowledging past missteps and implementing targeted reforms, there is potential to rebuild a robust system that equips local graduates with the skills necessary to drive the nation's development forward. Reclaiming South Africa's technical education legacy. The transformation of South Africa's technikons into universities of technology was intended to unify and elevate the nation's higher education system. However, this well-meaning reform has led to unintended consequences that continue to reverberate through the country's educational and economic landscapes. The unintended consequences of mergers between 2002 and 2005, South Africa underwent extensive higher education mergers, consolidating institutions to address historical inequalities and improve efficiency. This process resulted in the creation of 11 new institutions from 26 merger partners, affecting 62% of the higher education system. While the goals were noble, the rapid implementation without thorough evaluation led to significant challenges, including cultural clashes, administrative inefficiencies, and a dilution of the practical training that technikons were renowned for. Rising graduate unemployment. The shift from technikons to universities of technology has coincided with a troubling increase in graduate unemployment. Over the past 16 years, graduate unemployment has doubled, indicating a misalignment between higher education outputs and labor market needs. This trend suggests that the current educational framework may not be adequately preparing students for available employment opportunities, leading to a growing number of graduates unable to secure jobs in their fields. The erosion of practical skills. Training. The original mandate of technikons was to provide hands-on, practical training tailored to industry requirements. Their conversion into universities of technology has often led to an academic drift, where the emphasis shifts toward theoretical knowledge at the expense of practical skills. This shift has resulted in graduates who are less prepared for the technical demands of the workforce, contributing to the skills gap observed in various sectors. Vague universities of technology, institutions without a coherent soul. Even today, nearly 2 decades after the forced mergers, South Africa's so-called universities of technology remain institutions without a coherent soul, fractured, directionless, and torn between two incompatible forces. On one side, you have professors with PhDs, academics who have never built anything with their hands, never worked in a factory, never wired a circuit board, and never solved a real-world technical problem. Yet, they hold the power. They control curriculum decisions, funding allocations, and institutional prestige. They see themselves as the gatekeepers of academic legitimacy, determined to turn these institutions into traditional ivory tower universities, detached from the practical realities of industry. On the other side, you have the remaining pockets of technical competence, the lecturers and instructors who know how to fix machines, run factories, and train artisans. These are the men and women who once made Technikons successful, who understand real-world skills and industry needs. Yet today, they are laughed at, sidelined, and looked down upon. Why? Because they don't have PhDs. A professor who has written 100 academic papers on engineering theory is held in higher regard than a lecturer who has actually built and repaired engineering systems in the field. Someone with a doctorate in theoretical logistics management has more say in how students are taught than a technician who has spent decades running supply chains in the real world. A scholar who has never stepped foot in an industrial plant, a shipyard, or a power station is considered more qualified to shape a university's curriculum than someone who has actually led industrial projects on the ground. And so, instead of producing the kind of highly skilled, job-ready graduates that South Africa desperately needs, these universities of technology have become confused, unstable institutions, torn between an outdated academic elitism and the fading remnants of their former technical brilliance. The ivory tower takeover, when prestige replaced competence. The core mission of Technikons was always clear: train hands-on professionals who can enter the workforce immediately. That mission was thrown into chaos the moment these institutions were rebranded into universities of technology. With that rebranding came an identity crisis. Instead of strengthening technical training, institutions poured resources into research output, chasing academic rankings rather than job placement rates. Instead of expanding access to practical skills training, they diverted money toward postgraduate programs and academic conferences, mimicking traditional universities rather than embracing their original mission. Instead of honoring technical staff with decades of experience, they promoted career academics who knew nothing about industry but knew everything about peer-reviewed publications. The result? Graduates who know the theory but lack the hands-on competence to actually do the job. This is why, today, we have mechanical engineering graduates who can't fix a pump, IT graduates who can't debug a basic system, construction graduates who have never laid a brick or handled a real project, electrical engineering graduates who have never installed or repaired a real-world circuit system. The consequence? Oh, nation of unemployable graduates. South African companies, especially in mining, energy, and logistics, no longer trust these institutions to produce job-ready graduates. Why? Because a university of technology is not supposed to be a traditional university. It is supposed to be a place where students don't just learn, but do. Yet today, these institutions are churning out graduates who lack the real-world skills that employers demand. So businesses are either hiring foreign-trained professionals because their education systems didn't kill practical learning, or spending years retraining local graduates, teaching them the hands-on skills that Technikons used to provide. And what does this mean for the youth? They enter the workforce with degrees that don't translate into employable skills. They face sky-high unemployment rates, despite holding qualifications. They are stuck in a system that teaches prestige over competence, theory over practice. The solution? Bring back technical education, not more paper credentials. If South Africa is serious about fixing its education system and closing the skills gap, then it must reject this failed experiment and return to what worked. Stop trying. To turn universities of technology into research institutions, they should not be publishing endless research papers. They should be producing skilled professionals who can immediately contribute to the economy. Shift funding back toward hands-on training and practical skills development. The destruction was not just institutional, it was societal. The tragedy of the Technikon collapse goes even deeper when one considers how intimately these institutions were intertwined with South Africa's TVET, technical and vocational education, and training colleges. The Technikons were not isolated academic islands. They formed a nationally synchronized education ladder, a clear, accessible progression route for young people who had been failed by the schooling system, but still held the potential to become skilled, productive citizens. Here's how the system used to work. A young person, perhaps on the brink of being consumed by gangsterism, drugs, or hopeless poverty, finds a second chance in a TVET college. There, they develop a basic love for learning, starting with a practical trade, a basic N-level certificate, or skills development program. Over time, they gain confidence, find mentors, discover purpose, and develop the academic muscle to move forward. These students would then transition into a technikon where they could pursue a national diploma or higher certificate, build a career path in engineering, construction, electrical work, IT, or logistics, and move straight into the workforce or further their studies. It was a system of upward mobility, real mobility, not slogans, and the ANC shut it down rather than preserve and strengthen this organic, deeply rooted pathway from TVET to Technikon to professional life. The ANC chopped off the top of the ladder, burning down the very institutions that made upward movement possible. What's worse is that they did this while constantly talking about skills development in speeches and policy documents. In reality, they did the opposite. They left TVET colleges dangling, disconnected from any viable next step, and replaced technikons with dysfunctional universities that don't recognize TVET qualifications, making it harder for students to transition upward. Why? Would a government do this to its own people? Why destroy institutions that gave hope to high school dropouts, to township youth on the edge, to young men and women yearning for one shot at dignity? Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't failure. Maybe it was intentional. An educated society is harder to manipulate. A skilled, upwardly mobile population doesn't need slogans, empty promises, or permanent dependency. So instead, the ANC created a nationwide trap: flood townships with underfunded standalone TVETs. Remove the path to technikons. Replace it with vague universities of technology that fail to integrate TVET graduates and lack practical learning environments. And watch as millions remain stuck, educated just enough to want more, but not equipped enough to ever reach it. The ANC didn't just dismantle institutions, they dismantled hope. And they didn't do it by accident. They did it through policy, through ideology, and through a complete lack of vision for how to actually build a nation. So the next time someone talks about skills development or youth opportunity, ask them, where are the technikons? Where are the pathways out of poverty that once worked? Because talk is cheap. Development takes institutions, and the ANC chose to burn them down.